CPU. And that's pretty easy to look at and tell. Now the other things, you could look at like how smooth are the shadows, if it's forcing anti-aliasing, stuff like that. Some games force AA. Texture resolution. Some games will go crazy with texture resolutions and do like 4K textures when it's totally unnecessary for something like a chair. So it looks freaking great if you go like prone and stare at the chair leg, but totally unnecessary. So that kind of stuff does eat into VRAM, specifically with texture resolution. And then the rest of it, like geometry, that's really heavy on the shaders. Post-processing stuff kind of happens at the end of the pipeline, as the name would suggest. The rasterization is in there as well. We have a video and article on that. Now, as far as the optimization side of things, it is largely the game developer's job to figure out, how do I make this look good and keep this quality, but not make it kill my computer or my client or my customer's computer, whatever it may be. So what they can do, there's software like Algorithmic, which works. They actually, I think they're represented by the same firm that represents Fmod. If you've seen that logo, it's for audio. But software like that will help developers to do things like build textures that have multiple, basically sample sizes, multiple resolutions that can easily be deployed. So you have really good LOD scaling, level of detail scaling. So what happens is, as they build one texture in effectively an infinite resolution, almost vector-like box, they can save it out, and it can be saved as 16K, 4K, 2K, 256, and all the way down the chart, so that lower-end hardware is better supported. So that's optimization on the game side. You can also do things like pull useless triangles, pull features, pull the really anything that's either not going to be seen or appreciated by the player, get rid of it. And that's, again, on the developer side. So that's where optimization comes in. Driver side, the driver developers, which would be the IHVs or NVIDIA and AMD, they go through and they say, the way that this developer is executing this particular effect doesn't work well with our shaders and the way that the architecture is structured around them. And so we are going to change it so that it executes this way. That's how it happens on the driver side. Next question is from Stealth, two THs, Stealth1, says, question, what kind of lifespan should people expect for liquid coolers? I've had a Corsair H100 since 2013, it's been running great. When should I consider replacement? Are there any signs to be on the lookout for, such as pump failure? I originally had this on the 3770K and now on the 6700K. Yeah, so we talked about this briefly in the past as well, but just to refresh everyone, a lot of the Asetek coolers have a lifespan of about 5 years. It's pretty much the industry standard. The new NZXT Kraken coolers have a warranty of 6 years. You can actually expect them to last that long. And basically, though, it's around 5 years plus or minus 1, depending on which supplier and which generation of pump you go with. For signs to look out for, that's the important part. You should probably, if you have, this is what I do, because I'm a little paranoid about liquid coolers. If we've worked with so many, I've seen probably 3 or 4 fail at this point. And it does, they work great. Nothing works better than an AIO if you want something fast, cheap to deploy, and way better than air for the most part, with some exceptions. Good AIO will be better than decent air, good air. So when I deploy them, I set up at least something like SpeedFan, but ideally use a bit more advanced software. But SpeedFan at the least is free, and it does check the core temperature. A little inaccurate with AMD. That's just all software at this point. It doesn't necessarily need the AMD technology. Intel works fine. AMD, I need to research still. But generally, you'll at least, at the very least, even with AMD, it is inaccurate in a consistent way. I don't know how much of that is software versus AMD and what they have on their chip for diodes, but the point is it's inaccurate in the same way. And so if you're seeing a temperature even on AMD hardware that's like, it often reports below ambient for me. So let's say it says temperature is 20 C. Probably not real, but whatever. Let's say it is. And that's what it says for the entire 3 years you use the cooler. One day it says 40 C. Well, you know there's a problem. And the thing you can do with a cooler, best thing you do, monitor temperatures occasionally and listen for noise. When it starts making a lot of pump noise, there could be a few things. One, you might have the tubes oriented incorrectly, and check the manual for that. Or two, It could be that the liquid has begun permeating the tubes, and that's just what happens with these. The liquid, it doesn't necessarily evaporate, but it permeates into the rubber, and so the plastic or the rubber tubing over time will pull enough of that liquid out of the actual loop that it starts to lose its performance. The pump has to work in ways that it wasn't designed to work, and you get pump noise, normally gurgling, things like that. And that will happen with some of the, like the Kraken X41 series Azotek coolers, made some of that gurgling on and off throughout life, no matter what, even if they're fine, so don't be too alarmed. But if you hear it a lot, then maybe look into a replacement. You can also touch the tubes near where they connect to the pump, and if they feel hot, it really should not feel hot. If it feels like it's about the same temperature as the backplate of your video card, then it's time for replacement, because that means either one, it's operating way out of spec, you need a better cooler anyway, or two, the pump's just not really working, and it's not pushing the liquid through fast enough to cool down the radiator. It sits there in the tubes and heats up really fast. So that's what you can look out for. I'm sure there's more things, but that's the short version of it. So as always, Patreon link in the postal video if you want to help us out directly. If you have questions in the comment section below, please upvote and downvote them to help me find the good ones. Ideally, we just use the upvoting system and just push all the good ones to the top, and everyone is happy and gets a thumbs up. But I think that's how it works. Either way, help me out. Push the good ones up. You can tweet at us too with short questions, and subscribe for more. I'll see you all next time.
I will estimate them again. I believe that was your... My temple's magic subsides.
I used that back then for that testing, and then also used traditional hard drive for another test system, and it was actually noticeably quicker with the load times. So there are instances where an SSD at all makes a difference. Whether or not you see it with M.2 versus SATA, I would say those differences are almost entirely relegated to things like production workload, where if whatever you're doing is capable of writing, say, upwards of 2 gigabytes per second, because there's no bottleneck anywhere in the system. Like maybe, for example, if you're executing a script to do mass file transfers where there's no encode, decode, or transcoding involved, and it's just basically moving stuff, then yeah, you'd see a difference there, because the sequential times, especially so much faster on some of those M.2 drives. But you can be limited with games by plenty of other things in the system where I don't think there's a difference in loading times. That said, come back in a week or two, because I'll be revisiting that topic more thoroughly and actually have some test data for you that will provide to give more actual numbers about the differences, not just say is it noticeable or is it not noticeable. But in general, the main use case, if you set out to buy an M.2 drive or an NVMe enabled drive, you are primarily looking at things like, am I limited by the physical layout of my system? Can I fit a SATA SSD in there at 2.5 inch? And there are SATA drives, again, I'll talk about this in the future, but there's SATA enabled M.2, PCIe lanes are split off depending on NVMe versus SATA interfaces, stuff like that. All dictated kind of by the HSIO setup on your chipset, or dictated by the drive itself. Talking about that soon. Basically, the answer is not really a huge difference unless you're doing production things with mass file movement or a lot of really fast write times from whatever your production environment is. In those cases, you'll see a difference. Things like capture server, for example. You set up a capture server with FCAT, or live capture of the gameplay, and records it. That's an instance where you would want RAID SSDs if you're running off of SATA, or something like an Intel 750 series NVMe drive, which is what I'm using for our capture server. Because anything short of that is not necessarily fast enough, and you start to lose data, and that's bad. But that's a really specific use case. It's a kind of review use case. That gives you an idea, though. Next question, Tech Pascal asks, I was wondering if you can explain in greater detail overclocking processes and what they mean as far as power, target, memory offset, voltage, etc. Also, what's the process you go through each overclock? So for specific architectures, we've got videos and articles about how to overclock Maxwell, Pascal, and Polaris. So you can check those content pieces for that. To very briefly go over this, the question about a power target. So power target setting is basically you have a GPU, it says, maybe in the instance of a higher end GPU, it says something like I want 180 watts, and that's at 100% of the power target. And then if you offset that, normally you get 20 to 30% offset depending on what it is, and these GPUs, some of them do 50% offset. Within the same GPU from different vendors, you might get 20 to 30% offset. The reason that is because the percentage, as always, is kind of a little bit deceptive because it's, with Gigabyte, for instance, the Extreme water card that reviewed the 1080, I think technically has a higher percentage offset than EVGA's hybrid, but the base wattage is lower as well. So it comes out to be about the same. Count for that. But that percentage offset basically says if we're drawing 100 watts now, we offset it an additional 20 watts. Now you can draw 120 watts, so you've got more power headroom for the clock. So with NVIDIA and with AMD, basically you're looking at, am I thermally limited? No. Okay, so we'll push the clock. Okay, so now let's check again. Am I limited by power? No, not really. So then next check. Am I limited by voltage? Yes, okay, so then the user can do voltage offset. You've got really limited playroom with that for current GPUs that are out there. You only get so much in terms of millivolts offset. The GPU 2.0 is a little bit strange with it. It's kind of hard to work with. But basically, the question is, power target gives you more power headroom, which allows you to increase the clock rate of the card, which gives you, of course, a higher FPS to some extent. And then it does increase thermals though. It also increases clock rate stability, because if you've got, let's say, an offset power target, but you haven't touched your GPU clock rate, now there's some room where if the GPU runs into a scenario where it becomes power limited normally under 100% offset, 100% power target, it would throttle the clock back temporarily until it regains its footing, so to speak. Whereas if you offset the power target and you have extra headroom but you've not overclocked, now you can sustain that boost clock basically at a flat level if you plotted over time, and that's beneficial for reducing things like the occasional stutter in your gameplay and things like that. I think that answers the basics there. Next question is from Apurv Galat, who says, hey Steve, I wanted to ask if desktop replacements like the Acer Predator 21X really makes sense. I mean, battery life would be laughable, so what exactly makes them viable? Yeah, so the battery life's not great on any of the cyber-powered units we've looked at, things like that. You might get kind of best case scenario if it's a single GPU, like an hour gaming, which is not great, but and it's also not great battery just for normal use either, because of the nature of having higher end hardware, bigger screen, demands more power, things like that. But or higher resolution. But I guess the kind of use cases are, first of all, these are all, for the most part, either loss leaders or Halo products. So they're not necessarily meant to be how a company makes its money. It's more of like, let's get eyes on our company. And then just like with the Corsair Obsidian series cases, like the 900D, not a ton of people buy that. That's really meant to be more of a Halo product. And the idea is that people who see the 900D are like, this is a really high quality case, so then they recommend whatever's below it. And it's the same idea with the laptops. Now, as far as usability, the use cases for these desktop replacements are basically, are you a person who commutes between work and home and you need your own system in both locations? If so, and if it needs to be a high-end system, then you get one of these, you plug it into a dock on the other side and you use it as a desktop. Now the question is, well, why would you use that? Why would you need that much power? If you're doing something like rendering, like we do, we need effectively desktop replacements for when we're traveling to conventions to render the videos out fast enough and with whatever filters we want to apply. it's really just not possible on smaller laptops for the most part with the speed that we need.
The magic
But
of
the
temples.
system's basically plugged into a wall 100% of the time, so it's okay. It's not super low. So the market is again basically production, strange use cases, maybe something like someone who's moving around frequently between 2 or more locations where they live or work. That's basically it. But they aren't really meant to be kind of the main way for a company to make money. Next question, N3 Mini 5 is saying, how to ground yourself in order to be on a build. I heard that you can touch the power supply drill to do that, but does it have to be plugged in and turned on? Also, how do you use an anti-static wrist bracelet? Do you attach to any metal surface or to a PC plugged in? I have one of those. So, the setup we have is a little more elaborate than you necessarily need. But the way I do it, we've got an anti-static mat, not necessary. But this plugs into the mat, and that will handle any ESD basically from whoever's wearing it, dissipate it through the surface rather than into devices. And then for it to actually work properly, it's got to go somewhere, obviously. So this is just a metal hook. It's just a circle that goes around a ground pin in our case on anything that plugs into a wall. So the way I do it for anti-static bracelets is you've got 2 main modes. Normally, you'll buy them, like the Roseville ones, for a couple bucks. You buy them, they'll often have an alligator clip at the end of it, and you can actually pull those off. It's not going to hurt anything. And then this is under it, which is a banana plug, it's called. You can plug those into special banana plug outlets in a wall, so you can buy basically an adapter for your normal wall outlet and plug this straight into it, and you connect this to a bracelet on the other end. That's one option. Another option is you get something like we've got set up, where you have the loop at the end, the metal loop. This hooks around the ground pin. In the US, at least, that's the 3rd pin, the large circular one. Hooks onto that, and then you plug that into the wall, and anything that would be coming off of me through the wrist bracelet would go basically down the cable into the wall and be gone. So that's how we deal with it. And you can do it kind of hack an ESD solution. One option I did a video on was taking a power cable, like a standard power supply power cable, and you just basically cut the head off one end, clip the hot wires, and use the ground wire that's ignited and strip the housing off as you would expose copper. Then you can clamp into that. That would be a way to hack it. You can kind of touch a metal surface. It becomes a bit questionable how effective that is. So, one, if you're touching something like a power supply or case, it's got to have a path to ground. So ideally, you're plugged in with the power supply not on. You don't want it on. But then there's issues with, like, for instance, paint. Paint is really not a great interface to have and your grounding. It'll probably work okay, but some of that might just be because you've not encountered a scenario where ESD was an issue. So hard to say how effective that is. But that would be my backup. Yeah, clip into the power supply grill, plug it into a wall, and then you should probably be okay. But these solutions are a bit more effective, and some of them aren't too expensive. This next question I'm not going to answer, but I wanted to point it out. So it's from Il2Xbox, who basically asked about, are there any games that use GPU acceleration for character AI? If not, is that in the future? If I understand correctly, AI and machine learning algorithms can generally benefit a lot from using the GPU, basically paralleling on the GPU. I agree, it's a really interesting question. So I emailed that out to AMD and to NVIDIA, and we'll see if I get an answer, and if so, I'll address it next week. But I do not know. That's out of my area of expertise. Next question is from Mike Smith, who says, how long do heat pipe coolers last? I've had one for 3 years or more, 3 different rigs now, still working well. So basically forever. Heat pipe coolers don't really die. They're not like liquid coolers. They do have liquid, basically liquid in the heat pipe, but that's a sealed system. So unless it encounters some damage, that liquid's not going to escape because it's designed to sort of evaporate and then use capillary action to come back down. So it's not getting out of there. But yeah, they basically last forever. The only thing you're going to replace is the fan. That's a cheap replacement.
Defeat.
Next question, Orvis25. He says, "Hey Steve, second time asking. Can you explain GPU Open, AMD, and GameWorks NVIDIA, specifically what the differences are and what they do, and why GameWorks is still used far more than GPU Open in games, specifically when GPU Open is free and open source?" GameWorks is also free. NVIDIA doesn't charge for that.